Good morning. Happy Sabbath. And thank you, Heather. I'll have to thank you later for the trumpets. Appreciate that. It's good. I don't know. Can we have one trumpet blow just to kind of, maybe get it out? Can we? Beautiful, beautiful. Yes, very good, very good. Yes, it's the gift that keeps on giving. It's beautiful. And our balloon is here. It's good, our lost balloon. So a couple of things before we begin. Happy birthday to Stanley Condon. He is not here. He's had some medical challenges and is recovering, but we want to say happy birthday. If you're watching, Dr. Condon, we wish you happy birthday, and we're praying for your very best and for your healing. So happy birthday. I spent a couple of days this week up at Pine Springs Ranch, and the Southeastern California Conference offers a spiritual retreat program for pastors, and it is beautiful and wonderful and genius and enriching and very wise and enlightened, and I was thrilled to get to take part in that for a couple of days. It's something that one of our other pastors, Pastor Todd, is involved in, and he taught one of the days and was great and just really, really good, rich time. So I'm grateful for the conference making that available for us. It was very worth the time away. And just as a side note, as I was headed down, I passed our other pastor, Summer, who was headed up. And so all three of us were up there at one time or another. And I think even Katie, our interim youth pastor, was up at PSR. They're doing junior, senior Bible camp or Bible conference right now for the high school juniors and seniors. And Pastor Summer, I don't know if you all know this, but she writes the curriculum for that event. And she has for a number of years, something like 10 years or something. So she was headed up, with her 35 pages, she told me, of curriculum that she had written. And so she's up there, so we're praying for her. But that's just kind of an update of what's sort of going on in our house. I want to show you a picture. Oh, I had a picture of PSR. Gorgeous. So nice up there. It was perfect up there. So this is a sermon series that we're going to begin next week in the sanctuary at the 11 o'clock hour. Misquoting scripture. It's all those phrases and passages that we know that the Bible says in there somewhere, but that it doesn't actually say, like everything happens for a reason, which is not there, and one of my unfavorites that gets passed around. So we're going to do that through about, I think it'll take us all the way up to April, or all the way up to Easter. So that's going to be some fun. So join me next week for that. We're going to begin with Genesis. Did God really say? And sort of set some context. And I'll bring you some passages from Hezekiah, the book of Hezekiah. Those of you who know Hezekiah gets quoted often. So we'll do some of that. It'll be good. Now. Oh, and by the way, I did kind of a Facebook poll this week asking for input on that, and some of you gave input, and if you are on Facebook, go and look on my page. You'll see that little thing, and you could throw out your text. I mean, most of the ones I had were ones that were named, but there were a few that I didn't have, so I'm still kind of adjusting the plan for this, so you can still have input. One last thing before we get to the sermon. In your bulletins is a piece of paper like this. You're not going to be able to do it in here because we are in this. By the way, this space is amazing. I love our church facility. We have such a wide array of places to worship, and it's just such a gift to be to have this facility. And we have more to come later, even in this service. But anyway, it's a beautiful thing. So. Anyway, this is a feedback request from the Youth Pastor Search Committee that's already at work. They're asking for your input, suggestions, advice. If you have names of candidates, I talked with Jonathan Park this week, and we have a good list of people that are interested in talking more, and the committee will convene again in the next couple of weeks here to begin sort of looking at resumes and narrowing stuff down. But you can also give this same input on our website. If you go to redlandschurch.com on your phone, there's a Google form, and you can just hit your responses right with your finger, and it probably might be a little quicker than the paper. But the paper's great too, and you can leave it with a deacon. All right, let's get into it. Do you guys know that song? Oh, I had a picture of you. Or I had a picture of the Facebook poll. There it is. What sayings, axioms, and or proverbs in common parlance, isn't that a great word, are commonly quoted to us as from the Bible, yet do not originate from there. So, do you guys remember there's an old song, Over the River and Through the Woods, right? That's pretty high. Maybe we should go a little bit lower. Over the river and through the woods to... Very good, yes. So, there's a famous song, and I used to go over the river and through the woods, but not to grandmother's house. For me, it was to grandmother's cabin, over the river and through the woods to grandmother's cabin. And there's a picture of me and Grandpa Wayne. Grandpa Wayne passed away a couple of summers ago, but this is me and Grandpa Wayne. And I don't know how old I am here, maybe 4 or 3, really little, but I grew up going to Grandma's cabin up on Priest Lake in northern Idaho. Does anybody know? Has anyone ever been to Priest Lake? Anyone here? Raise it high. There's a couple of us. Yes. You know the secret. Don't tell anyone about the place. Priest Lake is an important place for me up in northern Idaho. It's almost in Canada. I was baptized in that lake. It's a very important place. And my grandma and grandpa, there we are again. There's grandpa. There's the cabin. And little me in the water over there. We used to go up to Priest Lake from Walla Walla. It's almost like a 5-hour drive if you don't stop at all. If you just go straight, it's a 5-hour. And my grandparents used to go there like all summer. They would go only for the weekend. They would drive all the way up there, spend Friday night, Saturday, and then drive home Sunday. And that's what you do when you live in the Northwest, where everything is 5 hours away. But and they used to take me. 4 or 5-year-old little me. I would jump in the Suburban with them, and we would drive up there. And there's another picture of me in the boat. And we would drive way, way up all the way. And, as a child, I just remember the drive being very, very long. It just went on and on and on and on. And I don't have any memory of it, but I have no doubt that I asked from time to time, what question? Are we there yet? Right, exactly. That's the question. It's like this, cultural, ubiquitous refrain. Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? And then, of course, my own kids, when we took the big road trip down here from Walla Walla. It's like a 20-hour drive or something, or 18 if you don't stop. I don't know. Maybe some people would claim, I don't know, Ronnie, would you claim to do it faster? I'm not sure, but it's a long drive down to Wallow. And I remember my kids saying, are we there yet? Are we there yet? And of course, the first time we ask that question is asked with optimism. Are we there yet? Like they kind of ask it optimistically. Well, maybe we are there. Maybe, hey, I know it's only been a little while, but maybe we are. And then the second few times is asked maybe like in honesty, like for real. Are we there? Are we almost there? Give me the real information. And then later on, as the trip unfolds, we ask, are we there yet? And we ask it as it moves forward. We start to ask it with a bit of a wince, right? We ask it with foreboding, right? Are we there? Like we don't really want to know the answer, are we there yet? We start to ask, and then we start to ask it as the trip starts to drag on even further, we begin to ask it with resignation, right? We ask it, it's almost like a joke. Well, are we there yet? And then finally, when we arrive at that place, the answer, yes, we are there. It may even come as a surprise because we've given up all hope that we will ever arrive. And so it comes along. And so here's where we're going today with our sermon, all right? We are in this sermon series on lament. We've been talking about grief and loss, and we've been talking about it for the last month or so, last 4 weeks. And this is the 5th and final week of this sermon series. And we've kind of looked through a bunch of stuff. We talked about how loss, like everyone goes through loss. We talked about how important it is to name our losses. We talked about models. We talked about how important it is to name the emotions that we have, even if they're anger or fear or shame or whatever. We talked how important it is to go through that. We talked about how it's important to go through our loss in community and not in isolation. And we gave kind of some warnings. And then last week we talked about the importance and gave some strategies for how we can be with other people around us as they go through loss. We talked about how the most important thing is to just be with them, be present with them. And so here we are. We're on the 5th week of this sermon series about grief and loss. And we're going to ask this question of grief and loss. We're going to ask the same question that kids ask in the car. We're going to ask this question of grief. When are we done? Are we there yet? When are we there? When have we arrived? When are we past this unpleasant, difficult thing called grief? When do we know if we're finished? And to put some flesh and bones on this question, I'll just share a little bit from my life. If you're anything like me, grief might feel like kind of a long road trip that just keeps on going on and on and on. And I think in a way, grief by its very nature leads us to ask this question. Are we there yet? Is it done yet? Are we over with it? It just sort of comes over and over again. And in my experience, grief shows up in life in waves. It can show up out of nowhere. One minute I can be feeling and thinking, man, I'm okay, I'm fine. And then I smell something, or I see something, or I hear a particular word or a particular phrase, or maybe I touch something, or I am touched in a certain way, and bam, I'm all the way back into those old feelings again. It comes in waves. I can be fine, and then all of a sudden I'm back into it. And I'm going to get kind of real with you. Early on when I lost my brother, it's been 20 years since we lost Casey. I remember multiple instances immediately following, in the weeks, 2 or 3 weeks following. So we're still just in complete shock and horror of what happened. But I would go through my day. I remember this one incident that was on the tennis court. I was out, a friend called me up and did that thing, said, hey, we're going to hang out. And he came over and we jumped in the car and we went over to the tennis court and we were hitting the ball. And all of a sudden, just nothing even happened. But we were fine. We were moving our bodies. We were playing. But all of a sudden, I got tunnel vision. And everything started to feel really strange around me, and I could just feel my heart start to open up. And I just said, we have to go home. And I didn't lose control of my tears until I got in the room. I kind of held it together, but I just sobbed for hours. And it was just completely out of nowhere. And I think in a lot of ways that cycle is normal. It's to be expected when we go through loss. It comes in waves. A little bit later, within the few years, my grief started to feel more like fear. And there's this famous phrase from C.S. Lewis from A Grief Observed, where he says, no one ever told me that grief feels so much like fear. And I think, at least in my experience, especially in the few years after losing Casey, that was very, very true. It felt like fear. It felt a lot like fear. And for me, that fear turned into urgency, and it turned into this active spirit of evangelism, and I was telling everyone about heaven and about what they needed to do to be ready for heaven. I felt a great amount of fear and a great amount of urgency to talk to people about how they could be okay. And I felt very fervent. I confronted a lot of people. I've had to go back and sort of mend relationships with my fervency during that time. But fear was driving that. Later on, years down the road after that, I've discovered that I still have some fear that's related to my grief. And a lot of times it comes out as looking like anger. I was telling Paige I wasn't telling Paige, I was telling someone that I took the boys for a bike ride. We like to go over to the Carriage Trail. That's on the other side of the hill. There's the San Timoteo Trail, activity trail. It goes along kind of the river. There's not really a river there a lot of times. But anyway, we like to drive the bikes there. And so we went there. And at one point we went up, and there's a trail that sort of hugs the side of the hill. And Sawyer is 5, and you guys all know Sawyer. He's great and wonderful and cheery and happy, and a lot of times he is just, his mind is in a different place than his body. And so I was riding along behind him, and he was riding along, and he was like, looking over, and we saw this old broken down car that was down the embankment, and so he was looking down the embankment, and it was like just a half an inch from him going over the embankment with the car, and I just reacted, just screamed, just yelled at him, "What are you doing there?" And just yelling at him, and he was upset and crying, and that was my grief talking. It was fear. It wasn't anger. He didn't do anything wrong. But just getting real with you, like I couldn't save my brother. And so when there's moments where there's things that I wish that I could do to save someone and can't do it, man, all of a sudden that stuff comes. This is me. This may be not you, but I'm just kind of sharing. This is how grief looks for me. Oh, wow, grief is still here. Are we there yet? No, we're not there yet. Grief is still here 21 years later. And even still, there's moments that comes out where I feel it in my gut. My sister is visiting right now, and there's a picture of Sawyer, and then below him is Asher, my nephew who's 2. And the other day they went to the beach and they spent some time together, and these two are really bonding. Especially on this trip, they're becoming the best of little buddies, and it's the sweetest and most wonderful and beautiful thing, and I can't stop myself from thinking about Casey's kids. He died when he was 12, and I don't get to meet those nephews, and they don't get to have this relationship with my sons. And so the grief just keeps showing up. And so as we ask this question today, when is our grieving complete? When are we done? In my life experience, and maybe your life experience is different from mine, I'm kind of being maybe a little too honest with you, I don't know, but in my life experience, the answer to this question is it doesn't. It just changes. We're not ever there with grief. It's never over, at least this side of eternity. We never arrive. Grief doesn't end. It changes. And if we were to look at the book of Lamentations, as we've been doing through this series, if we were to look at the book of Lamentations for an answer to this question, I think that we'd find something really similar. In many ways, I think this has been a theme throughout. We've seen these waves of emotion all the way through the book of Lamentations. We've seen despondence and rage and frustration and pleading and hope and bargaining and gratitude and confusion and shame and joy. We've seen everything in between throughout the book of Lamentations. Let's read it again. Lamentations chapter 5. Remember, Lord, what has happened to us. Look and see our disgrace. Our inheritance has been turned to strangers, our homes to foreigners. We have become fatherless, our mothers are widows. We must buy the water we drink. Our wood can only be had at a price. Those who pursue us are at our heels. We are weary and find no rest. We submitted to Egypt and Assyria to get enough bread, yet, interesting. We submitted to Egypt to get enough bread. And then if you jumped forward to verse 19, it ends the chapter with, "You, Lord, you reign forever. Your throne endures from generation to generation." So, Lord, we've seen all this stuff. We've gone through all these things, and yet we still hear this in the same chapter. Lord, your throne reigns forever and ever. But then he sinks again. Why do you always forget us? Verse 20. Why do you forsake us for so long? Restore yourself to us, a request, Lord, that we may return to our days of old. And then the final verse. unless you have utterly rejected us and are angry beyond all measure. What a way to end the book. It doesn't get tied up in a nice, perfect bow, does it? It doesn't get tied off and made beautiful. Everything is not okay. It ends unresolved. The emptiness of loss is still there. There are still questions, there's still worry, there's still pain. And I think Lamentations, the whole book, and especially this chapter, I think it testifies that we can find healing, and we can cling to hope, and we can lean on things that are sure, but the loss, the pain of that loss, I don't think it ever fully disappears. It changes. Think about those same people. Think about the children of Israel as they made it through Egypt. They talk about that experience of being in slavery in Egypt. And if you think about the testimony of the whole Bible, of the way that it speaks about and thinks about the Exodus, that over the years and the generations that follows, it shifts over time. Obviously, slavery, that oppression was absolutely awful. It was a loss. It was an enormous wound, a generational wound that would affect them for years and years and years. And in the book of Exodus, the story is remembered and reflected on as such. It's a terrible thing that needs deliverance. But the way that experience, the Exodus experience, is reflected on in the book of Exodus is different than the way that it's reflected on in Deuteronomy. The book of Deuteronomy is just as the children of Israel are entering the promised land, and they remember back on what had happened for them. And at that time, in the book of Deuteronomy, the experience of the Exodus begins to be remembered with some degree of celebration. It's a sign of God's triumph and his continuing grace for his people as they go to this next place. And the way that it's remembered in Deuteronomy is different than how it's remembered in the book of Kings, and in the books of Kings and the book of Samuel. In those books, it's sort of described as this bellwether. It's almost like as a rudder for the people of God. Look, remember back at what happened. He will still guide us today in these ways. And that's a different way of remembering it than the way that Exodus is remembered by the prophets. Right? In the prophets, Exodus is remembered as a warning. Watch out, follow God, or that's going to happen again. The memory shifts even again, and that's different than the way that Jesus remembers it, where he talks about it as being kind of emblematic of God's ongoing work in the world, and he takes on, there's lots written about how Jesus takes on sort of this mantle as the second Moses who's delivering people on God's behalf still. And that's differently yet than the early church. The way that the people of Israel remember the pain and the loss and the grief of the Exodus experience, that memory itself changes, but that memory never goes away. So here's where we're going this morning. In the changing of grief, I think there certainly can be confusion and new pain and frustration and hard work. But for many of us, including me, we've also found gold there. I want to take you to Isaiah, a familiar text for many of us to begin fleshing this out. Isaiah chapter 53. Who has believed our message? And to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? This is prophesying about Jesus. He grew up before him like a tender shoot and like a root out of the dry ground. He had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected. Now we see it by mankind, a man of suffering and familiar with pain. Like one from whom people hid their faces, Jesus was despised and was held in low esteem. Surely he took up our pain and he bore our suffering. Yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions, perhaps the most famous part of this text. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. By his wounds we are healed. God makes beautiful things out of dust, as the song sings. Out of the evil of the crucifixion, God makes incredible beauty. It's one of the themes through all the scriptures. We sing that song, the resurrected King is resurrecting me. Out of darkness, out of brokenness, our God brings life over and over and over and over again. We see this modeled throughout all of the scriptures. It's repeated constantly all the way through Jesus himself. God forms light and beauty out of the darkness. It doesn't mean that God would wish for it. It doesn't mean that God created the darkness or he designed for it. It doesn't mean that God's intention for us is to suffer. It means that God is bigger than any loss, than any pain that we possibly could go through. I think that this truth is so embedded in us that we can't help ourselves from looking at it. And I think looking for it in the world that we're living around us. We can't help ourselves. This week, probably all of us are aware of the death of a basketball player named Kobe Bryant. It happened last Sunday down here, right, just outside of LA. And I've been amazed listening, and I'm a basketball fan, so I've been, listening maybe more than the average person. But there was a helicopter accident, and he was killed, and a number of other people with him on this aircraft were killed. And I've been amazed listening to the conversation, especially on by some kind of sports people that aren't usually this talking about sort of life philosophy is usually not their lane, but they're still talking. And I've been amazed at how they cannot help themselves. The number of times I've heard different professional men break down, but also try to talk about silver linings, who are reaching for there has to be something good that comes out of this. And I don't have any judgments to say about whether or not, but the way that these different individuals have talked over and over and over again about talking about this bringing awareness to being present with one's family and putting our energy into being with our kids and to spend time with them. Just all sorts of different things I've heard over and over again, people just desperately clinging to pull something positive out of this story. We can't help ourselves. This pattern of God bringing darkness or bringing light out of darkness, it's so embedded in who we are. Even in moments of great darkness that we go through, we can't help but begin to look, what will be the good that comes? What will happen? In my experience with loss and grief, the gold, as I say it, the gold has shown up in many different ways, and probably some of you relate to that as well. But one way, I want to focus on one way that gold has shown up for me. One way that I think is probably fairly universally shared is how grief and loss tends to give us new eyes in how we see the world around us. One of the things that happens early on in loss, and this is my experience losing my brother, and I'm positive it's the same for other experiences, but one of the things that happens is that people who had similar loss, they come and they put their arm around you, and they say, not this crassly, but they say essentially, you're welcome in this club. You've joined a club that you didn't even know existed, but we're here, and we get it, and we got to stick together. It's a club that you never wanted to be a part of. It's a club you didn't sign up for, but you're in it. You're in it. And so for those of us who have gone through infertility and miscarriage, we know that we're in a club of other people who know what that feels like. And for those of us who have committed a crime or maybe spent time in prison, we know we're part of a club that we didn't know we were a part of. Or if we've been through alcoholism or recovery for addiction, or for a family member who's been through recovery or who's gone through the process of working through codependency, we know that we're part of a club that maybe some people wouldn't understand, but we see it. For those of us who have lost a child or who have lost a parent or who've gone through treatment for cancer or other difficult illnesses. For some of us who didn't complete school, who didn't complete college, or who didn't complete high school, we have been through pain, and we have a camaraderie with others around us who have been through similar things. I mean, we can name any kind of loss. When we lose, when we go through grief, we join a club because we all of a sudden see the world with new eyes. And I think if we do the hard work, that we've talked about in this series, if we name our suffering, if we do it with community and engage with people around us, if we do it with compassion and empathy, right? If we go through the hard work of grief, I think that we can come out the other side and we can see our grief transformed into gold. And for me, that gold is empathy. It's the ability to see the world in a new way. It's kind of a radar for folks and experiences that people have had that are similar to mine. It's a profound, wonderful ability, and it's horrific, and it's not something I would ever choose or ask for or want, but I can't tell you how grateful I am to have it. And the first time I admitted publicly that I was grateful for the experience of loss, it felt perverse. It felt like a betrayal because it didn't feel right. And at the same time, I had to be honest that I was grateful for who I was. And I was grateful for this ability to see that kind of suffering around me. And obviously, I haven't been through every sort of loss, so I have lots of blind spots, just like we all do. But when it comes to losing a sibling or losing someone, losing your family, there's something that inside of me that reaches out and identifies and cares for those around me. And that is something that quality is something that I am grateful inside of me. And yet, man, it feels so weird to say that and to admit that. And I can only attribute it to God's amazing, transforming, creative work within me and within all of us. At the beginning of this sermon series, I read a poem, the very beginning. It's by Ella Wheeler Wilcox, who lived in the 19th century. And she wrote this poem that says, "Laugh and the world laughs with you. Weep, and you weep alone. For this all sad old earth must borrow its mirth, but it has trouble enough of its own." I don't think the world has to weep alone. We each have suffered, and we each have gold to give. And the world doesn't have to weep alone. We can allow our grief to at least give us the gift of being able to empathize with those around us, with the world that we live in. We have that superpower through God's creative work. And as we close, I want to invite you all to participate with me in a little exercise. In just a moment, we're going to get up. We're going to make our way from this room into the sanctuary. And on the way, and I want to invite you to fill this exercise with meaning for yourselves. And I can't define that for all of us, but we're all going to get up and we're all going to make our way over there. We're going to finish our service over there. And what I would like to invite you to do is you go out this door right here, and outside the door there will be a table, and there may even be more than one table. I don't know. There was only one at the when I came in here, but I don't know what our creative team is great, so they may have made it easier. I'm not sure, but out there is a table, and it's full of broken glass. And what I want to invite you to do, and it's real broken glass. I mean, pain is dangerous. Pain cuts us. We got some Band-Aids ready, so just in case. But it's a table full of broken glass. There's enough for everyone to take a piece of broken glass. It's all different sizes and shapes, and some are big, and some are small, and some are curved. They're all different shapes. So I want you to pick up a piece of glass and carefully carry it with you over to the sanctuary. And I want you to do this as a spiritual exercise of the way that you might think about relating to your pain. And I want you to think about perhaps the idea that your suffering may be able to be transformed. And there's probably lots of different levels to this because we're probably all at different places. But for you, making this walk and taking the glass with you, this may only mean, yes, I can see how there might be a possibility that something good could come from this, right? Like maybe for you, that's as far as it can go. Maybe anything more will be a bridge too far, but maybe for you, it could be opening yourself to the possibility that God might be big enough to bring gold out of this experience. And I don't want to be rah-rah, and I don't want to be glib with anyone. Like if you're in that place, then that's where you're at. And I don't want to make anyone feel bad if they're not further along. But for you, it may mean that for you, it may be trusting God with the raw emotions that are going on, including being angry with God or questioning God or not knowing even what you believe. Maybe for you, it's admitting and owning what you actually feel. Maybe that for you will be the meaning that is in this exercise. Or maybe for you, it'll be about allowing your heart to be broken. Maybe for you, it will be allowing your heart to be broken for other people who have experienced loss in similar ways. Or for you, maybe taking that glass over to the sanctuary. Maybe for you, that it'll be about sort of saying, I can't stand it no more, to sort of use the words of Popeye. This thing is happening out here and I can't stand it anymore, and I'm going to let this fuel me for mission into the world. For whatever it is, I want to invite us to consider thinking about perhaps reframing our loss, perhaps rebuilding or taking risks or loving again, or maybe reincorporating this sense of loss into our overall sense of mission, or maybe just accepting the finality of it. I don't know what it's exactly going to mean to you, but we're going to take the glass over into the sanctuary, and in the sanctuary, we are going to make something beautiful with it. And so I'm going to meet you over there. Please, resist the urge to slip out and go to your car. Come with us. Come with us, join in. We're going to sing over, and then we're going to let you go, all right? It's only going to be a couple minutes, but take part in this ritual with me right now. Make your way right out here. We're going to turn on the lights. I think we might have some audio, some music we can put on, and I'll meet you over on the other side. Finn? You know, we began this sermon series. We began this sermon series by singing a hymn, and in your hymnals, it's number 530. And the hymnals are, I think they're underneath our seats. If you reach down there, you can grab one, number 530. But we sang this hymn, and it was called "It Is Well." And during that first sermon, I invited you to sing the hymn, thinking about the things that are not well. We sang it as an exercise of naming the loss that we've been through. And I want to invite us to consider singing the same hymn, but maybe with a little bit of a different bit of energy. Maybe we'll think about the losses that we've had. And we as a church community, we've had collective losses. You know, many of us have talked about losing a pastor that we loved. We've talked about the changes in the church community and the membership, and we've talked about the facility and all sorts of things that this community has gone through. And then, of course, many things that we've gone through personally. And I want to invite you to sing the hymn with me this morning with a bit of a different spirit. And I want you to consider singing it with an edge of possibility. I want you to sing "It Is Well" as maybe as a prayer of hope. God, may it be well. God, I am looking for the beauty and the gold that you are going to bring into this world through this experience. I want to invite you to sing it with a bit of hope and with a bit of optimism. It may still be a prayer for many of us in this place. It may be something that we can sing with our full hearts in this moment, and that's true. That may be true for any of us, and wherever you're at with that, you are welcome here. But I want to invite you to sing, and Martha's going to come up and lead us in the song, and I want you to invite you to stand to sing this with me.